right now. And then sometimes it's a necessity, and that's kind of where we are right now with COVID-19, right? There's a real necessity to be able to do virtual communication because everybody's got to keep their distance, and again, with a lot of working from home. Now, flip side of that can be technology issues. It could be software, it could be hardware, it could be internet access or speed, right? If somebody's out in Eastern Kentucky, down in the holler, they may not be able to get speeds that are sufficient to allow them to interact as easily. We've got a lack of the nonverbals, and we'll talk a little bit more about in another slide or two about how significant and important nonverbals are to effective communication. And then there's just some things you can't always replace face-to-face with virtual. There are some things that should be done in a face-to-face manner. You know, if you're getting ready to hire or fire somebody, certainly more so on the firing side. I don't know that I would like to be fired through a web conference or a Zoom meeting. Hey, good to see you. Guess what? We're terminating you at exactly 12:05. And that's not exactly something that you want to do. Again, it could be a necessity to have to do it that way right now, but it's definitely can be an issue. The ability to communicate with impact can make or break your career. If you can do it in a way that encourages others to open up and listen to your ideas are going to get much more attention. Following considerations here apply to any kind of communication, virtual or in person, verbal or written, but they're important to be thinking about. Preparing in advance before we speak, right? Being very accurate, complete. The concept, the old concept of, oh, that's on a need-to-know basis and you don't need to know, that doesn't work for effective communications. If there are things that you can't share, be open and honest and transparent about that and just say that you can't, right? But this whole idea of need to know, that's something from the past that just needs to disappear from language. Being very, very specific, limiting the use of words like all and always or never, and focus on behavior and not personality when we're dealing with people and interactions with those people, conflicts and things like that. And then finally, good feedback is essential to ensuring your communication was in fact effective, because one-way communication doesn't work as well as two-way communication. So asking for comments with your communication, allowing folks to engage with you in those communications is extremely important. Aaron, I see you said your daily commute went down from 50 minutes to 30 seconds. How's that feel?
Well, it feels wonderful. I have filled my gas tank once in 3 months.
See?
Instead of, a tank and a half every week.
So you got a little bit of extra cashola for when this all breaks up and you can take yourself a nice trip.
That sounds like a good idea.
Doesn't it sound like a good idea? All right, and you see our quote there from Peter Drucker, right? The most important thing in communication is hearing what isn't said. And sometimes that comes down to our nonverbals, right? Our picture here, anybody recognize the gentleman there in the picture? You may not recognize him at that age. That's actually Charles Darwin. And he started research into nonverbal communications back in 1872 with a paper that he wrote, The Expression of the Emotions in Men and Animals. So 93% of our communication is nonverbal. So that's only 7% for the spoken or written word, right? 55% of that comes down to our body language. And this is very hard to get in most virtual environments like email or phone calls, But we can see a little of it through the use of webcams when we do sessions like this. Now, a lot of you don't have your webcams up, and I get that. A lot of folks, when they're on virtual things, don't like to have their webcams on. But again, that limits the amount of nonverbal communication that can be associated. If I didn't have my webcam on now, you all would probably not feel, that I am as engaged as I am. The other 38% here are the paralinguistics. So that's our tone, that's our loudness, the inflection, pitch, and we can get some of that stuff through a lot of virtual meetings, but obviously we don't get that through email unless we're typing in all caps, right? Remember the old days when people used to type in all caps and not realize that that was the equivalent of shouting. So so much, 93% again, nonverbal. And why is it so much nonverbal? Well, we use all 5 senses when we're focusing primarily on sight. 83% of our communication comes through sight. And as a live virtual trainer, again, having webcams on really helps me to ensure that students and attendees are engaged. And by not having mine on, again, the flip side of that. So if 83% of what we gather is coming in through our eyes, it makes sense that so much of our communication is nonverbal. And we need to be aware of that when we're doing virtual communications, okay? Another thing we've also got to remember is that there are potential communication blockers out there, because each person is unique and how they interpret your communications may vary based on a number of general and individual communication barriers. So we've got 5 major groupings here: the semantics, the symbolic obstacles that may distort the sent message in some way other than how it was intended, making the message difficult to understand, right? We've got homophones, we got homonyms, we got homographs, we got different meanings in different cultures and languages. We've got body language, we've got different dialects, we've got different age groups trying to communicate, as well as various slangs. All of these are semantic communication barriers. And I spent a lot of time in the military, and military, we've got our own set of acronyms, and they love throwing acronyms around like people throw peanuts to elephants. When you're outside of the military, or even from one branch of military to another, those acronyms don't necessarily transfer very easily. So there's another way that your communications can be blocked. Let's talk about organizational barriers. We got rules and policies. We've got hierarchical positions, right? We got organizational facilities providing complex structures. How many, for your different organizations, how many layers of staff and management does your organization have? Are you very flat, or do you have multiple layers of middle management that you have to go through in order to be able to communicate up through, right? A lot of organizations say that they have the open door policy, but in order to do that, you've got to go through 6 layers of management. And so these are organizational barriers that you have to deal with as well. The rules and policies that you've got could really limit how communication can go within the organization. Psychological and emotional barriers. People are broken. Everybody's broken in one way, shape, or form, right? Anger, fear, and shame, some kind of deep and pervasive sense that there's something inherently wrong with me or you as a person. And so sometimes when people are afraid to talk openly, they're afraid of what could potentially happen if they said the wrong thing in a group setting, right? The president of the company is on the virtual meeting, and so they're going to lock up and not be willing to say things. Then we've got personal barriers, again, coming down to age, where you come from, what your health is, what your culture is, what your education is. All of these can also play into communication blockers. And then physical barriers, this is one that sometimes we don't always think about. Distance, technology, weather. Have you ever been walking along beside somebody in a rainstorm and tried communicating? I mean, first of all, you're trying not to bonk each other's umbrellas, but just if the rain is pouring down, communication sound doesn't travel very well through a rainstorm. So, or if you're talking on a cell phone in a rainstorm, it's not going to come across very clearly from the other side. Then we also have the physical barriers of time zones. You know, folks, I used to work in state government, and state government, most of it's based in Frankfurt. Well, if you're out in Paducah at, 6 o'clock at night or 5 o'clock at night, and you're trying to get hold of somebody in state government offices, it's already 6 o'clock at night and they're all gone. Let's be honest, if you try calling at 4 o'clock, most of them are gone too. But that's a whole different subject that we have to talk about, right? So all of these can potentially block the communication that you're trying your best, but all of these things can play in to prevent it from being very effective. And then we've got challenges as well. So we got the blockers, and now we've got the challengers. Don't receive the information that they need. Don't receive it in the way they wish to receive it. These little things here, just email isn't a thing anymore. Just text me, right? And I'm amazed with a lot of folks, they don't realize this is actually a phone too. And so much of it is just texting that people don't like talking on the phone, I guess. So they'd rather text than talk on the phone. There's that interpreting of information in the way they wish to get it, right? And so in our little illustration here, we got a conversation between these two going on, and it's about carrots. But are they talking about diamonds or are they talking about vegetables? Well, it kind of depends on the context of the conversation. And I was doing the longer one-day version of this session, and a woman came up to me afterwards and said, I got to tell you a great example of this. She says she used to work in a Medicare facility, and it was about, she worked with short-term disabilities, right? She was helping people to get the payments and things in relation to short-term disabilities. She says, and one of the first days when I was working there and I left and I was talking to some of my friends, and she says, yeah, I work with people with STDs. Well, STD has different connotations for different people, and it doesn't always mean short-term disabilities. So people interpret things differently depending on what they're thinking about. Could also potentially receive compromised information, right? Again, have you ever been on that broken cell call where you get like every third word and kind of sound a little like this? So you're not really getting everything that you need in order for the communications to be effective. This is another problem with technology when we're dealing with virtual environments. And we have to be aware of the speed that everybody's connections are working on. Again, if you're down in the holler and you're trying to watch a video online, probably not going to be as successful if you're right in the center of town. And then the infamous receiving information but not providing any feedback, right? Have you ever sent that message where you're asking for input by 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon, and 3:30 comes and you haven't heard from anybody, and 3:45, 4 o'clock, 4:30, maybe by 5 o'clock, maybe Monday morning, and you still haven't heard from anybody? And so, are you sure that the message actually got out? Do you just send it again? How do you deal with that? How do you all deal with that? What do you do? Carl, you said you've got weekly meetings with people from Asia. Are you getting feedback from them? You might be on mute.
Usually I have 10 minutes at the end of these meetings to get some feedback. And I learned that it was helpful, instead of just asking open-ended, to ask some specific questions or opinions about different parts of the things.
And so there's a whole culture thing there as well that you're dealing with, right?
Right. Well, it's also helpful to know the people that you're meeting with and what they care about and what their backgrounds are, because then you can ask some leading questions.
Right.
Dealing with that.
No. And Cassidy says, yeah, you can put a read receipt on the initial email. Yes. So then you'll know that they've read it, but they still necessarily haven't provided the feedback. So yeah, they've read it, but maybe they figured it's not worth responding to. So anyway, yeah, check and make sure that it went out. One of the other potential issues is, if you're putting attachments onto that and you're sending it to multiple people, it might be going to their spam folder. And so unless they check that on a regular basis, they may not have seen it. Another way that technology can limit our communications. So here's some things, some high levels of some best practices to go with email. And email is either the best thing since sliced cheese or the bane of your existence. And it just kind of depends on what you think about email in general. There's a stat that says that the average person spends 2.6 hours a day reading and answering email. And so that's a third of the workday. Personally, I think that might be a little bit low, especially for some folks that seems like they're always doing email. Email may not be the preferred mode of communication. You're absolutely right. Again, coming back to this, a lot of folks just text me, right? They don't necessarily want the email. But if you're in state government, like Cassidy is, they don't like textings because there's no trackable record of that, right? It's about open records and those sorts of things. So we want to make sure that we're utilizing the rules and regulations that we have to deal with. So here's a couple of best practices here that we can utilize. Reply all, right? Everybody loves to reply all. Email goes out, there's 30 recipients to it, and somebody does the infamous thank you, reply all. And that thank you goes out to 30 people. And then somebody else says, yes, thank you, reply all to another 30 people. And then, you get this continual flow of thank yous that's not really producing anything of value, but many of us have been Pavlovian trained that when the email dings or that little box appears that you've got a new email, the first thing you got to do is you got to look at it. So no matter what you're working on, you interrupt it to go check this, and all you're getting is another thank you. So be very careful about the reply all and what you do with that. Also, very careful about emails that you forward, that you carbon copy, and then the whole blind carbon copy. I'm not a big user of blind BCCs. To me, BCC is another way of saying CYA. And if that's really all that you're using it for, be more open and honest with that. However, if you are going to add somebody new to a conversation that's been going on for a while, that there's quite a thread on, always let everybody that you're communicating with know that you've added somebody new into that conversation. Respond timely, even if it's not a full response, right? And I don't know everything yet, but I'll get back to you with that, and then make sure that you do. And accept that no response means no. There's a lot of time, you get the spam email from folks that are looking for a gig or some sort of communications, and a lot of times I don't respond to those. And I figure, you know what? If after 3 efforts they don't hear anything from me the first time, then they'll send the follow-on that says, hey, I sent you something a couple weeks ago. And they continue to do that. I don't know whether it's it's the robot version or whatever, but there's no way I'm going to respond to those things, because then I'm landing up on somebody's, chain mail or something to that effect. When you've got a really long thread and you want to talk about anything previous that's buried down in there ways, always try to pull that up so it's right there so people don't have to scroll to try to find it. That's a good one. Using the subject line effectively. I had a boss one time that the subject line for every email and the subject line for every meeting was stuff. Just stuff. So he never sent an agenda in advance, so you never had a clue what the heck you were walking into. That was a potential nightmare. But he did that because he was in state government and he knew the system. So he wanted to assure that there was no record of anything that could be tracked. Okay. So he just put stuff. It drove everybody crazy. How about a better approach? Maybe a number system. 1 means that it's time sensitive. 2 means that there's action needed. 3 means that it's informational. Another way to do that is, FYI or NRN, no response needed. And then maybe action required or to do. And the difference there, action required is if they don't work for you. To do is if they do work for you, right? So you're handing off something to them. Clear, concise messages. There's this idea in the Twitter age that we live in now to limit all of your emails to 5 sentences or less. And really think about it. You might take an hour to draft the perfect multiple paragraph email. Who's going to actually sit and read it? I've in the early days, I used to write a lot of good, explicit, detailed emails, and I would find that folks never read down that far to get to that meat. So keep it short as much as possible. Put the key information up front, and definitely avoid using a lot of acronyms and abbreviations when you're going outside of your own little particular area. Amanda says, I used to demand that all communications on federal projects from my team had to begin with a project number. Great idea. Carl, definitely. Executive summary at the top. Absolutely. These are good, you're trying to get a message across as clearly as possible, but sometimes Amanda's got 7 projects, 10, 15 projects out there, and somebody starts talking to her, and she doesn't know what project it's about, and she's got to respond back with, which one are we talking about? And so, you do a lot of this back and forth that there's no need for. And one of the biggies, how would the context look on the front page of the newspaper? That was something they always used to talk about in state government, was how would this look on the front page of the Lexington Herald or the Louisville Courier? A quality professional signature block. I've got nothing against the witty quotes and jokes on your personal account, but on a professional, use the professional signature block. Checking the email address before you send is always a good thing, because chances are you've got more than one Tom or Jane in your autofill, and you're trying to send something internally, but that Tom that it actually goes to is one of the potential vendors on a procurement that you're getting ready to release an RFP on, and you just blew everything right out of the water. So that autofill can really, really come back to hurt you. The 24-hour rule when you're upset. Wait 24 hours before you hit the send on that puppy. Yes, it's going to be sitting in there flaming and everything within the draft box, but it's always better to wait, because when you look at it later, you might say, oh man, I can't believe I actually sent that. Anybody have a little story that they want to share about? You can do it anonymously, just, about something you sent that you wish you could have retrieved as soon as you went enter.
I could share a story if you have time.
Go for it.
This wasn't me personally that did the faux pas, but I was working as a consultant somewhere, and we had another consultant company that actually brought my company in, and they had a person that was in charge of each functional area within the company. And the lady they had working for purchasing, the purchasing manager didn't get along with her very well. And he had sent an email, and I don't know the context of the email he had sent, but she meant to reply to her senior manager, the guy in charge from her company, and basically she said, "See what an idiot this guy is." Well, she didn't hit forward or reply. She hit reply all. And
Oh, yeah.
that message.
Oh, yeah. That's a
And then
strikeout right there.
And then the purchasing manager forwarded that to the CFO.
Oh, even better. Yeah. This is good stuff. All right. Thank you. Aaron also asked, how do I feel about emoticons in business emails or IMs? Only if you know the person really, really well. I would definitely not include them in any first, second, or third communications back and forth. You know, if you've been working with somebody for a long time, then you might be adding that stuff in. But again, it kind of goes along with the professional signature block. If you're trying to be a professional, keep that stuff out of there. That's just my view on things. You might have your own. The last topic here to talk about quick on email is attachments. First of all, make sure it's there. The number of times that I've, over the years said that I've attached something, send it, and then realized, in fact, that I hadn't attached it. So then you've got to do the follow on that says, hey, sorry, forgot the attachment. Ha, 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 ha. Look at me, I'm an idiot, and send it again. Remember that those attachments can be forwarded to people that you didn't plan for it to be. And again, that it can also deliver things to your junk folder, because a lot of times Outlook thinks that an attachment is a spam, and so puts it right out there. So a lot of times, if you've got the ability to add a link rather than the attachment and just have them follow the link, that's good as a way to eliminate that stuff. Because here's what happens. If you've got a lengthy attachment that you send, right, it's going to sit there in their inbox forever. It's taking up space. Somebody somewhere is landing up paying for the fact that that attachment is sitting in their inbox forever. So if you got a link, it's a lot better way to approach it. If you hear from the phone best practices, set up and update your voicemail. Don't you love when you try calling somebody from a professional organization and it says, I'm sorry, the voicemail has not been set up? There's a problem there. Answer within 2 rings. This kind of goes back to my service desk days of running the service desk. Answer it as quickly as possible, but you have to be aware of your surroundings, especially, again, because most of the world is operating from this now. The things that I've heard standing in line or sitting in a restaurant for lunch or dinner that people just openly talk about without realizing who's listening, it just boggles mine. Logins, passwords, bank account numbers, all these sorts of things people are just rattling off without any awareness of who's around them. Another one also from the service desk days, before answering the phone, especially if you're being kind of grumpy with your day, smile before you answer, because it's really hard to be grumpy when you're smiling. And if you ever doubt it, try it sometime. You'd be surprised at how it changes your outlook before you answer the phone. Also, again, from a professional way, start with a good, polite greeting. A lot of companies have the standard greeting that you have to use, right? Good morning, good afternoon. Here's your company name. This is so-and-so. How may I help you? Is always a good one. I was actually having a bad day with one of my banks that are credit cards that had messed something up. And so I was pretty hot when I called, and the guy that answered the phone says, hey, good afternoon. so-and-so bank. This is Bob, and I'm having a great day here. How can I help you? And it really made me stop and say, you know what? Bob's not the problem. I'm not going to ruin Bob's day by flaming on him. So it really took me back a notch. Now, some people, I've used that as an example before and said, some people said that would just tick them off even more. Bob, here it comes. But to me, it really brought me down a notch. I had a good conversation with Bob. Bob finished, took care of all the problems and things that I had, and we moved on from there. Active listening, we're going to talk more about active listening in a couple of slides, but basically own the call when you have the call. Okay, pay attention, and if you're going to be taking notes on your computer or something, let the caller know so that they don't think you're doing other work instead of listening to them. A lot of times I've called places and you can hear them clattering away and say, you know, I can hear you typing, right? And then they stop for a couple seconds and say, oh, I'm sorry, how may I help you? So it wasn't that they were doing my work, they were working on something else. Speak clearly and slowly, avoid the blind transfer. Again, that's not so much of a thing anymore. And then definitely try to end on a positive note with the follow-up timely if needed. So some responsible virtual communicator practices here, ownership of your word, right? Responsible communicators consider all of these as they help maintain the trust and confidence of those that they're interacting with. So take ownership of what you say is one of the cornerstones of good, effective communication, and includes making sure that you are heard and understood. Good communicators use terminology that others understand. Limit the techno speak and the acronyms, right? Remember our discussion about the STDs. Respond constructively to people. Promote supportive meeting dynamics. So ensuring that all voices are heard during the discussions. It also means that the pros and cons of different opinions should be elevated through a lens of what is best for the team as a whole, rather than any one individual. Again, requesting feedback and that active listening. So we've talked about active listening a couple times. Let's focus in on it, right? With most virtual environments, there are a number of ways that the message can be lost or misinterpreted. So whether we're leading the communication or just participating, I encourage you to focus on using active listening skills. Active listening refers to the practice of listening to understand. And we've all been guilty of listening only in appearance, listening because we feel we're supposed to, but we're not really processing information. It's not productive in a team environment. Remember, the point of teams is to allow team members to influence each other. So it's a four-part process. Engage. First of all, show that you're interested in what's being said. Face towards the person and focus on them. If talking virtually, turn on your webcam. Body language will tell the other person whether you're actively or passively listening. Do not be distracted by other things happening nearby, and put all those other activities such as typing, texting, and reading on pause. Our next one, suspend our opinion. Often we form an opinion about another person's message before they've even finished expressing it. So interrupting and giving quick pre-formed responses is an indication of impatience and passive listening rather than active. Wait and focus on the entire message that's being communicated. Third, actually listen. Be attentive to both the spoken and the unspoken message of the other person. Paying attention to how the message is being communicated can often provide insight into the emotion behind the message. Use your eyes and ears to fully understand what the other person means, and don't interrupt or try to finish the person's sentences. And then restate. After the message has been expressed, take a moment to repeat what you heard the speaker say. It's the infamous, so what I think I heard you say was, so let me be clear that I understand, and ask any clarifying questions. During the communication process, we filter messages through our own beliefs, values, and experiences. So restating the message will ensure that you and the other person are on the same level and shows the other person that you are actually listening. After you've done all of this and you've heard what the speaker has said, only then should you engage in the discussion. Give positive feedback, because everybody appreciates that positive reinforcement, and be sure to state any criticisms tactfully. All right, so that's enough about the first half about effective communication. Let's spend a little bit of time now talking about meetings management and the best way to make them more productive. You know, I think Shakespeare said it first and best: to meet or not to meet, that is the question. And so before a decision is made to have a meeting, you should always consider these 5 major questions and then ask yourself, can this be accomplished in a different way? Can it be done through an email? Can it be done by a phone call? Can it be done by walking down the hall? Obviously, right now, that's a little bit hard to do. The management by walking around, I'm a big proponent of that when you are in the office environment. Can you do it through a chat? Can you do it through a team channel or Zoom meeting? How else can it be done? Most small one-topic discussions can be resolved in 5 to 10 minutes. So do you really need a meeting for that? If not, or a meeting is the most logical way to deal with things, then yes, the meeting should be initiated. Here's the thing. I recommend 20-minute meetings instead of 30, and 45 to 50-minute meetings instead of 60. Our culture of 60-minute meetings can be blamed on Bill Gates, because Outlook has the default of 60 minutes and people don't go in and change it. And so then you land up with meetings back to back to back to back, and before you know it, that 4th or 5th meeting in a row that was supposed to start on time is starting almost an hour late, because it takes a while for everybody to get there. If you do shorter meetings, the 20-minute or the 50-minute, it allows time for people to get from meeting to meeting. It allows for the bio breaks. It allows everybody an opportunity to stay on time. Not only that, most 60-minute meetings don't really need the 60 minutes to be done. They linger. And so let's break that habit of 60-minute meetings by going shorter. All right, meeting roles and responsibilities. There are 4 key ones that over and over again have been defined. The facilitator owns the agenda draft for the meeting, the setup, including making sure that all the technology and all that stuff works. And they lead the meeting to achieve effective progress. They want to engage everybody and make sure that it actually is going the way it should. Scribe records the meeting notes and any decisions accurately, records any to-dos and resolved issues, serves as a facilitator for the next meeting, if that's appropriate, okay? Because by having people switch roles and continue through them over and over, it ensures that everybody stays engaged in recurring meetings. Because if the same facilitator over and over and over again, the attendees start to do this, and they're not being engaged. So by continually changing those roles, that really can help. It doesn't take time for people to travel to and from meetings anymore. That's true, but the other thing that I find is sometimes virtual meetings can run a little long, and so they're not starting on time. It may not be travel time, but it's connection time. It's getting all the materials together and reading through them in case that I've noticed on virtual meetings, large project reviews, lost engagement drastically at the, don't run super long meetings either, because people have a tendency they can only take so much and then they start to fade. So that's another thing to consider. All right, a timekeeper monitors the overall meeting time and assists the facilitator with maintaining the agenda timelines, because your agenda should include all the items that you're going to discuss, a time frame for each, and who's responsible for leading those discussions. So that's all part of what should be there. That makes the timekeeper's job very, very easy to ensure that we're staying on target for everything that needs to be discussed. Because let's face it, without good roles and responsibilities, you got an agenda. If you've got an agenda and not just stuff, you can get to the end of the meeting and have only made it through the first item. Timekeepers are essential to ensuring that things stay where they need to stay. And then finally, the attendee is not a kick back and put my feet up. They should be submitting agenda items in advance if that's appropriate, right? They should be reviewing the agendas. They should be checking off any of the to-dos that they've had to do. They've completed all their homework to be prepared to actively engage in it. They should be actively engaged in the meeting, commit to and report on any things that they've got to do, and then prepare for their next role. So our scribe rolls up to our facilitator, our timekeeper rolls up to our scribe, and whoever's next on the list of attendees becomes the timekeeper for the next meeting. So quick poll, again, going out to our poll EV. Do you utilize meeting roles for the meetings that you run? Okay, we got a couple of sometimes, a yes and a no. And I will say they really do help with keeping things running smoothly in meetings. Other than a agenda in advance, roles and responsibilities for meeting roles are one of the key things that can help make your meetings more effective. And speaking of agenda, here's a common layout for the things that should be on there. A meeting without an agenda sent out in advance is definitely not very effective. It should start with the purpose or the objective, and that purpose or objective should be, at the end of the meeting, I want the group to what? What do you want to come out of this thing, right? Is it just a meeting for the sake of a meeting? Let me tell you, meetings just for the sake of meetings have no real value. One of the things you've got to consider is what's the return on investment for this meeting? I'm going to throw some rough numbers out here, right? A $50,000 salary works out to about 25 bucks an hour for 2,000 hours for a year. If you put 8 people in a meeting at $50,000 a year, that's a $200 meeting. If you hold that meeting every week, that's 10 grand. Is that meeting worth 10 grand for your organization? That should be a question somebody's asking. Because again, if you're just meeting for the sake of meeting, and you know, those big meetings, those big town halls, they can be multiple thousands of dollars. And what's coming out of it? You know, I used to have a boss that we would get there, he'd gather people from all over the state and walk in. He'd walk in looking at his device and say, so anybody got anything? If not, okay, have a good day. And I actually spoke up one time and I said, well, that was a complete waste of money. And everybody stopped and kind of looked and said, wow, I can't believe, I says, you know, think of the number of people in here at our average salary. This meeting, that meeting of just, does anybody have anything, cost 20,000 bucks. And what value was it, not to say anything about travel time? So, you know, let's start questioning whether these meetings are value or not. All the other stuff there, again, standard kind of layout for an agenda. Scribe is one of the most important roles. Before the meeting, obviously have to lay things out. Yes, especially if you're traveling for the meeting, absolutely. Like I say, all that travel time for people, some people had to come in the night before, and you know, then you had the hotel expenses and et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it's crazy to do something like that. Unfortunately, it happened a lot. So before the meeting, laying things out and making sure that everything is set. During the meeting, focus on recording the notes, and we're focusing on action items, not an in-depth discussion of things, right? What actually happened. Meeting notes should not be the great American novel. They should be boring. They should, it's not Moby Dick. It should be pretty boring stuff, basically focusing in on the decisions that were made. Okay, after the meeting, making sure that you review them with the facilitator, make sure you got everything right, clarify, and then send out those notes. I'm coming up on I got about 6 minutes left, so I'll make sure I get through the rest of these. Effective virtual meeting best practices. Choose a time that works. Again, remember those time zones. Send out agenda in advance. The number one thing for good, effective meetings, an agenda in advance. Roles, again, talked about that. Learning technology beforehand. I've been on a number of different conference calls where they try to get something started and it can't work. The handoff from one person to another doesn't work or whatever, and so they'll end up canceling it and rescheduling later. Start and finish on time, that's my intent. Identifying yourself. If hosting, greet others by name as they come in, be very, very engaging in that. Ensure you can see and hear everybody if it's in one of those kind of settings. Again, ask for webcams if possible. Keep the meeting on topic. A lot of times, especially in larger meetings, you'll see, this little group over here will start talking and this little group over here will start talking, and before you know it, nobody's really paying attention to the meeting. You got to keep them engaged and you got to keep them on target. One person speaking at a time, especially in a virtual environment, when people start talking over the top of each other, then everything's getting broken up. It's kind of like the broken cell phone. Nobody hears anything that anybody else is saying in completeness. Make everybody feel like they're included, and then document everything. And a good strong finish. At the end, summarize next steps and let everybody know that meeting minutes will be forthcoming, and thank them for their attendance, right? Make them feel like it was worth the time of being there. In terms of meeting minutes, circulate them to the folks that they should go to. Let them go early if you can, absolutely. I always try to say, hey, I'm going to give you back a couple of minutes of time. So even the most efficient and productive meeting loses a good deal of its impact without good meetings afterwards. Summarize, again, we're not needing a word-by-word account. Be very objective. Write in the same tense throughout. It's not an English composition class, but there are certain rules of writing that we should be following. Avoid those inflammatory or personal observations about the people that we're communicating. Again, it should be a very, very dull thing. Not a lot of adjectives or adverbs in there. And if materials are distributed, ensure that there's a link to them so that everybody can see it. So kind of bringing it all together, or the money slide, if you will, the keys to virtual success. Be aware of those communication blockers, challenges, and the lack of nonverbals that you might be dealing with in a virtual environment. Follow email and phone best practices. Be a responsible virtual communicator. Utilize those active listening skills and request good feedback and utilize good feedback. Ensure that your meetings are planned before, during, and after, and utilize those meeting roles and responsibilities if your organization allows you to do that. So that's kind of a quick over. This is other courses of interest that you might be interested in from Solarity. We've got a full one-day effective communications and meeting management class. We've got a class on time management for those that have trouble with managing their time, managing organizational change and transition, and a number of our best practices classes related to project management and business analysis. And we got a ton of self-paced courses out there covering everything from business to strategy, to security, to project management analysis. You name it, we've probably got a class for it out there on our website. So go out to solarity.com and check that out. And we're currently working to bring a number of those classes into our learning management system, our typical live virtual or into an on-demand style, because I understand some people can't always make it to the meetings that we're hoping for. So, any questions that anybody has? Our mission here at Solarity is helping people, organizations, and communities thrive. So if we can ever be of assistance from a training or professional services perspective, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. You've got my personal email there. If you want to talk to our sales staff about what we can do to help, go to sales@solarity.com or 888-272-4494. For those of you that are PMPs that were looking for a PDU for this hour, there's your 10-digit code there. Go out to PMI, drop that in, and it'll automatically set you up for the one PDU. So how do you ensure people feel included virtually? By having those discussions, by calling them out by name, by just kind of reaching in and trying to pull them out. So I hope that helps. And otherwise, again, if you've got any questions later on, please let me know. One last poll here, if I can get it to work, is what do you think of today's session? And I thank you for your time. Go out to Solarity.com. We have a number of these free webinars and things that we're doing over time. So go out there and check and see what's out there. And if you got any questions about how we can help in other ways, again, reach out to us. We really appreciate your time today. I hope you had a good lunch for ham and cheese or turkey and cheese, whatever you're eating, chicken McNuggets and fries, I think one of the others was. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you again on a future webinar. Thank you very much.